Good morning, students. We are going to begin with the first lecture, that is Modern European Drama. And as per your syllabus, there are four texts that are prescribed in your syllabus, in your curriculum. And the first one is here, Anton Chekhov's The Cherry Orchard. The second unit is Henrik Ibsen's The Doll's House. And the third unit is Federico Garcia Lorca, The House of Bernard Alba. And the fourth unit is Bertolt Brecht, The Caucasian Chalk Circle. We are going to deal with each of these units in detail. But before that, let's understand the objectives of the paper. It says to introduce students to the thematic and aesthetic variety and forms of European drama. Now, as you must have studied while your study of modern British drama, there exist several types of plays and several types of thematic and aesthetic variety of drama and theatre that was practiced during the British times, that was practiced in the British era, that is around in the beginning of the 17th century and late 18th century. This one of them, and of course in the beginning of the 19th century as well. These practices, thematic varieties, include the practice of the theatre of absurd, then there was the theatre of cruelty, then you also witnessed we had existential school of thought or the melodramatic tradition of drama. So these are nothing but thematic and aesthetic varieties that existed under the umbrella term modern European drama. Now, when I say modern European drama, I mean that it includes countries which are the part of Europe, that would include, and there had been around 44 countries that include Russia, Germany, UK, France, Italy, Spain, Ukraine, Poland, Romania, Netherlands, Belgium, Greece, Czech Republic, Portugal. So the list is huge and it is around 44 countries. So the idea is the texts which are mentioned here as prescribed and part of your syllabus, they are the lionized representation of the best of the works that existed in the European drama. So the theatre practices of Austria had been as much vibrant as, say, any other country, say Norway or Ireland or Albania, or for that matter Macedonia or various other countries of Europe. But we are going to take up the best representative works, the lionized representation of European drama, and the works which has brought up some consistent paradigmatic shifts in terms of the theory and practice of drama. Now the next slide says that modern European drama is diverse. It is expanded over various continents and countries of Europe, and the best of all these theatre practices and theories are designated under the term modern drama. But before we start with analyzing the very term modern European drama, it is also equally important to understand what was or what constituted modern literature. So the term modern literature was something that referred to the entire corpus of literature that were written in and around World War I. And in and around World War I, that means that was a high point of modernism, that is World War I, and that was not a very celebrated moment in the history of world, rather a cataclysmic event that disturbed the entire peace, the entire equilibrium of harmony of the world, of the peaceful and harmonious world, and something that brought out destruction, that brought out death, that brought out misery which was reflected or unreflected, told, untold, revealed, remain unrevealed. So the agency of that misery was not quite appropriately given to each and every one who suffered the ants of World War I. So this grave site of modernism is something that we see constituted majorly the part of modern literature. And of course, coupled with it, we had other sociological, political, economic, socio-economic, socio-cultural explorations and inventions that had been taking shape, that somewhere shifted the mind of the man from being too collective to a more individualistic one. For example, Darwin's theory of scientific evolution, it right away questioned the existence of God. It right away established that we human beings may not be really descendants of one particular God or one civilization, or it established itself at the level of science, how human being or human civilization started to get emerged. Then there was this increased mistrust, increased questioning of the practices of church, and there was this higher deal of non-reliability upon the religious scriptures that had till now ruled the many countries, and of course we are talking of European countries in particular. So these religious scriptures and the moral teachings of these scriptures started to become highly unreliable in cases whenever modern predicament started to get emerged, or more modern enigma that was experienced by the modern man. And apart from that, there was this breakdown of multiple industries, and as a result of these multiple industrial breakdown, we saw the industrial revolution. At the same time, the breakdown of these industries, and of course, this breakdown of industries led to widespread unemployment. So the angst that accompanied this crisis was at the heart of a writing of modern literature. And apart from this, a lot of suffrage movements were also taking shape. There was this feminist movement that emerged during the modern times. Then there was this leftist movements. A lot of Marxist writer, Karl Marx started writing, and of course, under the influence of Karl Marx, a lot of Marxists established themselves in philosophies and in sociology, and came up with lengthy documents of a complete overturn of how societies should be governed or how societies should be ruled out. And increasingly, there was a lot of questioning on the role and duties of the state with a capital S, S-T-A-T-E. Apart from this, economically, the world also witnessed a couple of high points and low points as well, and that created a lot of influence on the European countries as well. For example, there was this Great Depression period of 1930s in United States, and of course its repercussions were faced throughout the world. And apart from that, in European countries especially, it gave rise to a lot of disillusionment, as a result of unemployment, a lot of disillusionment, bewilderment, a sense of bewilderment among the families of all the classes, not just middle classes or lower classes, but even the concept of bourgeois or upper class order started to get shattered and started to get questioned. So all these challenges from various spheres, they all demanded kind of reforms, and all the previous certainties that were offered by the scriptures or the church or from other institutions, they were questions. The code of conduct in generically and personally, the code of conduct described by these institutions were again questioned, and as a result, modern man came up or emerged as someone who had to face the brunt of these outside influences. At the same time, he was disillusioned. He had to face the emotional angst of the social shifting that was taking place. A lot of new phenomena was emerging. The old social order was almost on its verge of being diminished. So these kind of shifts in various phenomena, both outside and internally, somewhere gave rise to the emergence of modern literature, and literature which started writing about these issues in detail. Now, focusing on the specific term called modern European drama. Now, modern European drama was written in and around the middle of 18th century and the beginning of 19th, 20th century. It was primarily in Europe because we are taking into consideration the European drama. So we are going to discuss primarily the aesthetic variety, the thematic variety that existed under the term modern European drama. And of course, we will not take into consideration the likes of African drama, say New North American drama or the Latin American drama, right? So this periodization that we see of modern European drama, that is beginning with the early 19th century and continuing till 20th century, this periodization is in itself very long periodization. It encompasses not just these 4 or 5 representative works or representative authors or dramatists. Rather, the list is long. It consisted of around thousands of playwrights which exhibited very different styles, beliefs, and approaches that all in all contributed to the aesthetic variety of modern European drama. And of course, we will talk about the details of these aesthetic varieties in coming lectures. For example, under the very term modern European drama, the aesthetic variety that existed that included realism, the likes of anti-realism, then there was this bourgeois drama, then there was this drawing room drama, there was this naturalistic theatre. So majorly, there was a clear shift from verse drama towards the prose drama, and as in terms of the subjects of these dramatic writing as well, we see the subject now shifts from the men who were belonging to the elitist class, the noblemen, the high merchants, or the kings and queens. Now the center was shifting to the peripheries. Now the people who were residing at the peripheries, they became and they appeared at the center, and they became the fulcrum around which these major dramatists started composing or narrativizing their stories or dramatical performances. They become the central character of these plays, of these drama. So as Isra Pound has mentioned, the clarion call should be make it new. Now that something became the crying call, the clarion call, which went to set out new trends for literature. Now the broad periodization that we see here, now throughout history, drama has performed and represented the political, the religious, the national, the ethnic, the class related, and gender and individualistic concepts of identity. And this broad characterization or periodization that you see here is majorly decided, is majorly selected on the basis of the significance or the impact it created in terms of bringing some critical or paradigmatic shift in terms of the theory and practice of theatre. So what we see here, ancient Greek theatre, Shakespeare and Elizabethan theatre, then the French playwrights and the neoclassical scene where Corneille, Racine and Molière in France, these were the important literary dramatists, and these were important figures, extremely important playwrights who appeared on the French playwright scene. And then there was this Italian commedia dell'arte influence. So Italian commedia dell'arte obviously emerged with the Renaissance in Italy, but its influence is something it continued throughout many centuries in Europe. And in fact, Molière himself was the one who adopted much from commedia dell'arte and included and started writing his own comedies. So the Italian commedia dell'arte and its transformation into the 18th century drama, and then the German Enlightenment, the philosophies of Schiller, Lessing, Goethe, and Lenz, and there was this romantic period that emerged, Romanticism, with a list of Kleist, Byron, Shelley, Hugo, Musset. Now, obviously, usually students know Byron and Shelley mostly with their poetic contribution that they made as romantic poets, but Byron and Shelley were equally thriving playwrights. They contributed much to the dramatic traditions of England around 18th century, and their dramas was even performed during those days. So we will deal with them we will deal and talk about the romantic period of in the theory and practice of drama later. So with the turn of the century, we had Ibsen, Chekhov, Strindberg, Stanley Lewisky, and then finally, with the turn of the century and emergence of say 20th century, we witness these theatre practitioners such as Edward Craig, then Arthur, then Meyerhold, O'Neill, Pirandello, Bertolt Brecht, and then Becker, Samuel Beckett, and then Miller being the American playwright, Arthur Miller. So we will take each one of them in detail, but first is important that we consider how and when these emerge. For example, with the turn of the century, we saw Ibsen, Henrik Ibsen, an important playwright who gave rise to, who is also known as the father of realism. And then Chekhov followed the middle path, and he was not just catering to realism, but at the same time he was interested to bring out the complexities of realism, and of course he included some of the shortcomings of realism as well. And then Strindberg famously is known as the father of expressionism, and Stan Lewisky is again an outstanding actor, character, director, and an important figure in Russian theatre and practice, and of course the part of Moscow Art Theatre. He was responsible for the performance of many of the plays of Chekhov, Ibsen, and he was so involved in in Moscow Art Theatre that he even performed as part of the performance team. And it was even believed that Chekhov and Stanislavski many a times were at loggerheads when Chekhov believed that a particular way his play should have been meted out or it should have been performed. Stanislavski, having the rights of the director, would project it in a certain other manner. So this, in a way, this conflict of the dramatist and the playwright versus the director was always that can be witnessed in earlier times too, during the 15th, 16th centuries, 16th, 17th centuries, and this was continuing. Even Moscow Art Theatre witnessed this kind of conflicts between Chekhov and Stanislavski. Stanislavski, again an important, outstanding director who also performed during Moscow and contributed much in the creation and absorbance of, say, Moscow Art Theatre and theatrical practices in general in Russia. So Stanislavski and Chekhov both were Russian playwrights and Russian, they belong to the Russian theatre. Now moving on, I also mentioned with the turn of the century and with the emergence of 20th century, Edward Craig. Now Edward Craig was again a very seminal figure. He was, although an English modernist, but he was a very famous theatre practitioner. He himself was a director, an actor, and an important figure in terms of the explorations that were brought in the scenic designing, the background designing of the stage. He also worked with Stanislavski. He worked in Moscow Art Theatre. He was regarded as one of the very stubborn figures, very stubborn theatre practitioners. And he was so stubborn that at times, if he would not have a complete artistic control over the performance of a play, he would simply refuse to direct it. He would simply refuse to design any project. Now, why he's regarded as Edward Craig is regarded as an important figure? Because he was the one who brought out a lot many innovations in stage or theatre direction. For example, the stage lighting, ceiling, the stage light ceiling that we witness on our theatre performances. Craig was responsible for doing away with the traditional footlights, and he was the one who brought out the use of masks and puppets, and he was the one who brought out the use of placing light above the head. Although he is also a controversial figure, he gave out quite a number of controversial statements. For example, he said that director is everything, and he diminished completely the role of actor, producer, and other small and major figures that contribute ultimately to the performance of a play. And he even said that a true artist's responsibilities are just the part, a true artist is someone who is just the part of the director's role, and he's merely a puppet in the hands of the director. He's merely a marionette in the hands of the marionetter. So puppet is marionette and marionetter, someone who is playing with those puppets or directing those puppets, the puppeteer basically. And of course, he brought out the immense use of mask as a mechanism for capturing the attention of the audience. Next, we have, as an important figure, we have Artaud, Antonin Artaud. He was also an important theatre practitioner and an important figure in the tradition of theatre, and he was the one responsible for bringing theatre of cruelty. Now, primarily, he contributed much to the avant-garde theatre movement, avant-garde mechanisms, avant-garde, writing essays about avant-garde movement, but he was also responsible for bringing theatre of cruelty onto the stage. And by cruelty, I mean that, and he meant basically, he reflected that the elements of violence should be involved onto stage, but this violence should be for the purpose of purification. Now, this obviously reflected some deal of astonishment for the fellow playwrights and of course for the fellow critics of theatre, because how can violence be too much violence be shown on stage with the advent of modernism, because violence was something, or the showing of violence was something long back discarded by the neoclassical French playwrights, and as a result they insisted that the decorum on stage must be maintained. But Antonin uttered with theatre of cruelty, he believed that art should embody and art should intensify, and it should gigantically intensify the underlying realities of human life. And in order to recreate these extreme emotions, in order to recreate this thrill of experience, cruelty, theatre of cruelty must be established, or cruelty must be brought out onto the stage. So the idea was, he was functioning on the primary, his poetics was that theatre should become or should be an act of organized anarchy. Theatre should be an act of organized anarchy, and as a result of this, he rejected the multiple forms that was proposed earlier by the theatre practitioners, and he said clearly it is much needed to incite chaos and violence onto the stage. And what was the need of the hour? The need of the hour was to force the spectator, to force the audience to engage with the performance in such a way that at an instinctual level they would feel that some brutalities of life are being shared. Right? So he was the one who was waging a cry against that the aesthetic distance that exists between the performers and the audience, that should be removed. So complete aesthetic distance should be removed, and the fourth wall should be completely diminished, and the audience should be brought in direct contact with the dangers of life. So the list next that we have is of Meyerhold, again important figure, Pirandello, Brecht, Beckett, Miller. Now Brecht and Miller, Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett was quite a seminal work, well-known work, and people know the theatre of absurd primarily because what Mr. Beckett has contributed to his Waiting for Godot. Then, of course, Arthur Miller, an American dramatist, his very famous The Death of a Salesman, again, middle-class American comedy written around 1930s as a result of the Great American Depression, the Great Economic Depression in America. So these were the important literary figures that stood themselves up among other playwrights, and that can be seen as the part of the broader chronological distribution of history, of important history of European drama. Now, it says a significant leap or periodization. Now, what happened was, with the most significant leap that took place in terms of the cultural practices, they all can be observed in majorly all European countries, but of course with slight differences here and there. So when we say Italian Renaissance, it definitely emerged not just in England, it witnessed its flowering in Spain as well, in Germany, and of course in France it appeared late. So first in England it came up, the significant leap of cultural practices that we are talking about. First it came up in England, then in Spain, and then with the emergence of Renaissance in Italy, this cultural pattern spread itself rapidly to other Western and Central European countries, including the Low Countries of Scandinavia, Portugal, Poland, and the other non-German speaking countries as well. As I mentioned in the next slide, how Renaissance in Italy spread itself through England, and then it spread itself to other part of the Western and Central European countries. So for further readings in the next coming lectures, we'll talk about Commedia dell'arte in detail, and what was Commedia dell'arte and what other significant periodization that exists. For example, we have witnessed the golden age of Spanish theatre. There was this German Baroque drama, there was this French drama, French Baroque drama, and the rise of England and France, and then further the decay of Spain, the contradictory tendencies that existed among these theatrical performances in various countries, but mainly we witnessed there was some sort of stagnancy in the rest of the Europe, especially and including the German territories. And finally, it emerged with the advent of modernism in early modern era. We saw a new kind of form with the inclusion of melodrama and elements of romanticism, realism, non-realism, and other parts of avant-garde movement, including naturalism, expressionism, surrealism. They all started to getting absorbed in literature, and as a result, they created a huge deal of impact upon the playwrights as well.